A leisure boat trip on the Mississippi River. Quiet. Only the tranquil sounds of nature. Instead of the bustling of city life, the traffic, music, and lunchtime crowds, those Friday afternoon sights and sounds drowned by the Mississippi. Oliver Reedy has a lifetime of flood stories from Grafton, Illinois.
It's the 73, the 93, all the ones in between.
After the flood of '93, he rebuilt his business, Ojan's Fish Stand, on higher ground. And now?
What do I think? I didn't build it quite high enough.
Grafton's flood stage is when the river rises to 18 feet. In this April 2013 flood, the river crested at about 29.5 feet. Ojan's had to close, as did some other businesses. Oliver says it happens often enough that he has flood survival down to a science.
It gets in this building at 27.5 feet, so around 26.5 we begin to pack things and get ready to go.
Ojan's Fish Stand has reopened as the floodwaters recede to 25 feet.
It's about
Right here.
It was up to here.
Yeah.
And so what you built was sturdy enough to handle that.
Yeah,
and,
we cleaned it up.
So the biggest impact on you, what exactly?
The loss of revenue is the biggest impact on us. You know, you lose three weeks of business. It's like a vacation without pay. That's what happens.
Building a livelihood along a river like the Mississippi, you have to develop a thick skin and a sense of humor.
I fished a little bit off the back deck.
Oh no! Did you?
Oh yeah.
Did you catch anything?
Yeah, I caught a couple fish.
We're thinking it's going to go down, and we're pretty optimistic that this is the end of the flooding season in the 2013 year.
Jim Newton owns the Mississippi Half Step restaurant on Grafton's highest, driest point on Illinois 100. Jim says he doesn't get flooded, but the flood kills his business.
Whenever there's water in the road in Grafton, people tend to think that the whole town does shut down. Of course, as a business owner, I feel so sorry for the areas that are affected, the businesses that can't operate, and you just experience a hit because everyone collectively thinks that the town is completely underwater. There are certain areas, but there are certain areas that will never be underwater. So as a town, Grafton always will stay open.
Larry Mead is the coordinator for Jersey County Emergency Services and Disaster Agency. Mead says the Mississippi brings tourists to Grafton. Located on Illinois 100, the River Road brings in the money, but the river can also take it away.
This is Route 100 through Grafton, the main route through Grafton, and as you can see, it's well covered by the floodwaters, even though it's receded considerably. Jersey County does not have a large industrial base, so a lot of the economy is based on tourism. Flooding like this, it really impacts the economics of the people and businesses, and it's really a blow to the area.
Mead understands all too well the importance of accurate river forecasting for Grafton.
A lot of the preparedness actions and response planning is based on that forecast. Just a few inches of water makes a world of difference.
For the most up-to-date flood forecasts, Mead often relies on hydrologist Mark Fuchs with the National Weather Service out of St. Louis. They are both looking forward to more accurate river forecasting in Grafton through new technology called CHPS, or CHPS. It stands for Community Hydrologic Prediction System. CHPS is an advanced software system that gives hydrologic forecasters different options they never had before. Through the software's model adapter framework, CHPS allows for the sharing of models and data from around the world. This gives the National Weather Service new global resources, the global exchange of ideas, creating a new toolbox to improve local forecasting methods.
Specifically, it gives them models to use. They used to just have one model to use to work with, which was NWS RFS, that stands for National Weather Service River Forecast System. And that was all they had. They didn't have any options within that model. What the model gave them is what it gave them, and they could make adjustments to the forecast, but they couldn't go out and look for another hydrologic model to give them a completely different way of coming up with the forecast. That's what CHPS does. It gives us a variety of not only hydrologic but hydraulic modeling and options within all that to come up with maybe a different ideas to what the water might do.
And allows for the creation of new models for individual cities, but this takes time. CHPS has been around for a couple of years, but due to funding and manpower, creating new models is a process. Arnold, Missouri can be checked off the list as new models for Arnold are completed in the spring of 2013.
This is the Merrimack River at Arnold, and the lower curve here, this blue-green curve, actually represents what Arnold would get to if the Mississippi River was low. But of course the Mississippi River is high, and these are the observations to prove it. And this upper curve shows what the model is simulating of the Mississippi River backwater, plus that Valley Park inflow coming from upstream. And the observations show how far off that simulation actually is. The red curve, the red line here being the present model time, and then everything out to the right of that represents the forecast for Arnold.
A variety of CHPS models are used in the greater St. Louis area as a whole to help forecasters decide river predictions.
We were doing that actually for a while during the drought, just to get an idea as to how low the Mississippi might get at St. Louis. Navigators wanted to know, will we have to ship this cargo using some other method, rail or truck lines or whatnot? Do we have to totally abandon the river as a way of getting this stuff from point A to point B? As it turned out, they never did have to shut down the river, but navigators did have to curtail how much they put on the barges significantly last December and January mostly.
There are many layers to river forecasting before predictions are possible.
This is snow water equivalent, and it shows what water you have left on the ground when you take all the snow and ice that's on top of the ground is melted down to just water. This represents our soil moisture accounting model at St. Louis, Missouri at the Mississippi River. And what we try to do is we get these lower graphs accurate, describing the lower zone of soil moisture there. If we get this accurate, we'll try to get the upper zone layer correct and calibrated correctly. If that's calibrated right, this top graph will then show the surface runoff at St. Louis.
And near the confluence in Alton, downstream in St. Louis, and especially upstream in Grafton, there are even more layers of river forecasting to consider. The forecasts for these Mississippi River cities are complicated by the Missouri River flowing into the Mississippi here at the confluence. The problem is that the Missouri River is a big unknown because it has yet to be calibrated.
Communities along the Mississippi River, like Grafton, stand to benefit even more by newly calibrated forecasting models of the Missouri River, and that's in the works.
When you calibrate a river system like the Missouri, you're basically going from way upstream at the headwaters first, and then you're working your way downstream through all the reservoirs on the Missouri and through all the tributaries that feed into the Missouri. Every hydrologic model and hydraulic model, really, but especially the hydrologic ones, require the river forecasters to go into a lot of historical data and run rainfall scenarios through the model and tweak the results as compared to what actually took place,
thereby getting an appropriate rainfall to runoff response. Calibrating the Missouri is a work in progress over the last decade and will take a couple more years to complete. So creating enhanced CHPS models more specific to St. Louis are likely a couple of years down the road.
Once we know what's coming out of the Missouri, St. Louis is a pretty straightforward forecast because Mississippi is a fairly known quantity, and so is the Illinois. So once the Missouri becomes a known quantity, and we figured that out, upstream at Jefferson City and then points downstream, the St. Louis forecast gets much more accurate in a big hurry.
And once the Missouri River backwater is better understood, Grafton's forecast should improve with CHPS.
You have to keep in mind Grafton is a nightmare to forecast. It really is. You have the main stem Mississippi, which is fine, but then you have the Illinois joining it right there at Grafton. And then just a few miles downstream, you have this huge influx of water coming in from the Missouri that varies wildly. And that has a huge impact on 30 miles upstream at Mel Price and Grafton. I think with chips in place, we're going to be doing a lot less bouncing around with that forecast. But once that rainfall is on the ground and we know how much rain is in the ground, chips makes that transition from rainfall to runoff a lot less ambiguous.
We can get out of here, we can move our stuff out.
And then one day, people like Oliver will rely on this newly improved science of forecasting floods rather than call the National Weather Service every day for flood updates. For Oliver, having a more reliable early flood warning would take some getting used to. In the meantime, he has his own method.
I'd look out the back door and I start seeing it coming and I start worried about it. I don't mess with calling those folks every day till it gets around 24 feet or 25, and then we go from there.
In Grafton, that's what many people do. They can't stop the water from coming in. They deal with it, find a way around it, and clean up the Mississippi mud. But they don't want tourists scared away by it either.
In Grafton, you can always say it's been worse. That's kind of our catchphrase. They used to say, come hell or high water, Grafton's always open. And the town's never going to go under as a whole. There are still businesses that will always be able to be open no matter what.
Watching the floods now for 45 years, Oliver takes it one day at a time.
They'll come back. People will come back. They're just waiting. They'll come back.
For Innovations, I'm Kathleen Berger.